Hello, welcome to your OPS 245 week 6 video. It's hard to believe it's week 6, isn't it? You're gonna get, I'm not sure how I'm gonna cut this up yet, but probably 3 different videos this week, I'm thinking, because I'm gonna do 2 sets of slides in one go, because there's 3 sets of slides for this week. I'm gonna completely skip the Python slides because I don't think they're that good, and I'm just gonna show you how to code like we did the last time we had some Python. And then, so that's going to be video 2. 2 sets of slides, video 1. And then, I'm going to give you an overview of your assignment 1, which I'm releasing in the next couple days. So, let's look at, and they're both short. There's like 15 slides, and I think the next one's 8 or something like that. So, this video shouldn't be super long. The next one's going to be a bit longer, and the assignment overview is probably about 10 minutes. So first up, we're looking at a lot of stuff in Lab 4. We're looking at managing user accounts. We're looking at how to configure services and run levels, and we're looking at using sudo and configuring sudo, which you've already been using sudo all semester, right? But we'll get into that. That's the next one. So managing user accounts is honestly a really important job if you're going to be a sysadmin. Used to be back in the day, and well, still is to some extent. A large part of your job in managing users is resetting passwords, which is why we have automated processes to do that now, right? Because people got tired of resetting passwords, especially after a big holiday and stuff like that. You know, everybody goes away for a couple days, comes back. Christmas is really bad for that, right? You go away for like a week, you come back to work, you forget your password. So what do? You put in a ticket. Before automated systems, you used to have to bug someone to do that, and it was a nightmare, which is why we have automated systems, because we're lazy. So anyway, we're going to look at how to manage user accounts, different things we can do to them, and how to control which services they can run and which ones they can't, which is kind of cool. All stuff you're going to have to do as a sysadmin. So a lot of the stuff we've done so far is just installing the operating system and managing software, right? But there's a lot more to being a system admin than that, right? You got to manage accounts, and it's a continuous thing. You need to add accounts, you need to remove accounts. You're going to want to automate this process in some way, so automation's a cool thing. Unfortunately, we're not doing anything cool with automating account creation, and we totally could be, but we're not. So there's a couple important files that we're going to look at. etc password being one of them. PASSWD. And it doesn't actually store the passwords, but it used to at one point in time. This is where they used to be. So it's a database that stores your user accounts on the system, both regular users and system users. And you never modify this account directly. You use some commands to do this. But if you take a look in the account, here's using grep with the user global variable. You could just grep for a username. We see the current user logged in. This field with the X is always going to contain an X, but at one point in time that contains the user's password, which you can probably understand why that was removed, right? It's a bad idea. That was removed a long time ago, not even recent history. This is the user ID and group ID, their user name, their home directory, and their default shell. So all kinds of useful information. So you never modify that directly, because it could do really, really bad things. It could corrupt the file, which could make your system not function properly and do very, very bad things. Use a bunch of commands to do that. So like user add, for example, to create a user account. Makes sense. User add, create an account. There's some useful options like the -m option, which will populate the home directory and it will take actually anything that's set in etc scale for a directory structure and use that as the basis for their home directory. It's a really cool thing, which I think you look at in the lab. With the -E option, you can set an expiry date. So maybe it's an account that's going to they're only a temporary contract. So you want it to expire after 3 months. You're not going to remember to do that, right? So you're going to set that to expire right away. And once you've done that, they can't actually do anything yet because you have to set a password for them. So you, as the admin, has to run the password command to set the account password. User mod is used to modify the account. And some common things we do there, we want to change something to the user account, right? Change their name because they got married or they got divorced or they just felt like changing their name, because people do that sometimes, right? You might want to change their login name as well to reflect that change. Or maybe you messed up configuring it and you want to fix it before they get the account. Instead of deleting the account and then adding the account, you can just modify the account. Could be a useful thing because you made a typo. Happens all the time. I make typos all the time. So -C will change the full name, right? -L will change the login name. And if you want to delete the account, because again, sometimes you need to do that, unfortunately, user del will delete the account. But by default, the home directory is still left intact. And why might that be? Well, picture a scenario where somebody does something sufficiently bad to get canned from the company. But they were an admin, or they were on an important project, and maybe they have a bunch of files, or maybe there's evidence sitting in their home directory that we want to keep around. But we don't want them to be able to log in at all, right? So that's why you don't delete the home directory by default. However, if you're sure that there's nothing in there and you want to get rid of the home directory, you could include the -R option. User del -R, home directory's gone. Another handy thing, we could set their password to expire. So ch-age will do that. It's pretty easy. The -E option with that will set the expiry date. And as always, check out the man pages for these, right? There's a lot more information there. Now, one of the cool things about Linux, and this applies to Active Directory and Windows users, right? But where do you think they got the idea? Just saying, Linux did it first. Group accounts. So group accounts they're every bit as important as user accounts. Generally, you set up groups for the types of permissions that you want to apply to users. These might be based on department functions, right? You logically divide up your company because people need different levels of access to do their job. And then you can apply permissions to that group. And also, when people apply file permissions, remember there's user, group, and other, right? Other being other groups, group being people in your group. This will allow people to granularly control their file permissions accurately if you use these correctly. So you can find them in etc group, and again, it's in the etc directory, so you know it's an important file. But you're never going to manually edit that, just like that password file, right? Oops, I hit the over arrow in the wrong place. So why bother using groups? Well, keep in mind, when files are created, they're assigned to an owner and a default group, which usually represents whoever the owner is, right? The group that they are a part of, their primary group. Changing the ownership of the group, or changing the group that people are in, gives you a lot more control over who to access your files, right? If everybody's just in the same group, then that group permission kind of loses its meaning a little bit, right? It's kind of a lot like other, except not open to the internet. So, for example, you've got senior programmers, right? And they want to set the group ownership for all that source code to everyone in the group. So you could have everybody in that particular group update the software by giving them the right permission, without giving everybody else on the system access to do that. It's a secure thing. And realistically, they'd probably be using something like GitHub, right? Just a silly example. So just like users, you can manage groups. You can add groups with the group add command. And if you want to pick a specific group ID for them, you can use the -G option. And strangely, if you want to modify a user's group, you use the user mod command. And if you want to add secondary groups, dash lowercase a, uppercase G will add secondary groups because users can be part of more than one group, which is pretty great. Now, if you don't want to add a secondary group, you just want to change their group because maybe they move departments within the company or the organization or the whatever, then -G without the A option will do that. And if you want to delete a group, because sometimes you make a mistake or sometimes you got a group kicking around that doesn't need to exist anymore, group del will take care of that for you. So that's kind of all about users. We're going to talk about services now, right? Which we've done a little bit of this. We've done a little bit. It's another important task that you manage as a sysadmin. You got to manage services. You have to start them, stop them, restart them, enable them, and disable them. Start, pretty self-explanatory, right? Start the service. Stop, also pretty self-explanatory. Stop. Technically, when you have to bring a service down and back up again to apply changes from a configuration file, which you do every time you make changes to a configuration file, right? You have to restart the service, so bring it down and then up again. You could stop it and then start it, or you could just use restart. It does both things in one step. A little bit quicker. Disable stops it from starting automatically on boot. And enable does the opposite of that. Lets it start automatically on boot or configures it to start automatically on boot. And we're using the systemctl command. You might see documentation floating around, but probably not. But you might referencing service or check config. Those are old, very old commands. We should be using systemctl. Knowing what services are running on the system is part of making your system secure, right? And again, like once upon a time, security was not a part of a sysadmin's job, right? But as things have migrated to the cloud, it kind of is. You gotta think about security as you do your configuration. Keep that in mind next semester when you take OPS 345 and you're working in the cloud. Although you've already worked in the cloud a bit, right? You did some stuff in Azure in your Windows courses. And like part of hardening a system is disabling services that aren't necessary. So if you're not using SSH, disable it because you don't need it. So we use the systemctl command to do pretty much everything we need to do with services. I know I said pretty much, but literally everything we do with services. As far as starting them, stopping them, seeing what's going on, right? Systemctl is the command we do. And you need sudo to run that command. You need elevated privileges. So sudo systemctl and then the thing that you're doing. And then the thing that you're doing to it too. That's your syntax, right? So for example, systemctl, sudo systemctl, status, and then the name of your service. An example here is Apache, which you're going to learn about later in the semester. It's the HTTPD service name. This will display what the current state of the service is, right? Is it running? What its process ID is? Did it start successfully? Is it enabled to start on boot? Usually after I start and enable a service, I run this to confirm everything took. It's a useful thing. Systemctl, again sudo in front of that, right? And either stop or start or restart, and then the name of the service will do that thing, right? Stop, we'll stop it. Start, we'll start it. Restart, we'll stop it and then start it. And technically you could do those two things separated by a semicolon on one line. It's not incorrect, it's just you could do it a bit faster. sudo systemctl enable is the name of the service. That makes it start on boot when the machine boots automatically. And disable, opposite of that, right? If you're removing a service from the system, you want to make sure you disable it. Which we did this, right? We've done all of these things. With when we disabled and removed firewall-d and installed, started, and enabled IP tables. Remember when we did that a couple labs ago? It's a useful thing. So in addition to all that stuff, we're going to talk about run levels and targets. There's a lot of stuff thrown in this week. So run levels and targets. Run levels are kind of an outdated term. They're from a long time ago. Targets is the more correct term right now. Targets specify what mode you want the system to boot into, whether it's graphical, command line, or a couple different options for rescue modes and stuff like that. When you installed your 3 virtual machines, your 4 virtual machines, right? Your host is a virtual machine. You specified what the default was in the installation, right? You installed the graphical, or you installed multi-user, which is command line only. But you can change that, at any time. You just have to install it if you didn't install the GUI. It's not a big deal. So all the different targets you can use with this command, the command that's coming up. Power off, so power off.target will shut it down, or you just type power off. Reboot.target will shut down and reboot, right? Turn it off and turn it back on again. Shut down and reboot. It's a silly explanation there. Rescue.target will give you a rescue shell with limited access, limited services, no internet, so you can restore something on the system. You usually use this if something really bad happened, like a large part of your file system isn't mounting on boot or something. That's usually when that comes in. And then multi-user.target. That's your command line only interface that you're using in CentOS 2 and 3. And graphical.target, that's your GUI, which also gives you command line as well, right? It's pretty great. So now you know what all these are. What do you do with them? Well, you use them with systemctl, right? So sudo systemctl get default will show you what the default target is, what the system's set to do on boot. This is usually useful if you're changing things. You want to confirm that the change took. If you want to change what the default is, you use systemctl and then set default, and then the target being one of the ones on the previous slide, right? And that will modify it. So if you've got command line only, you want it to set to boot into GUI, that's great. Or maybe you configured it as a graphical system and now it's just going to be a server. You wanted to do everything graphically because that was a good idea, but it's going to be a server. There's not going to be a monitor or keyboard hooked up to it. No point having a GUI. So let's set it to boot into command line only. It's a common thing. And you can also change the current target of the system without rebooting. It's pretty great. The first example here sort of is the opposite of that because it literally reboots the system, right? So sudo systemctl isolate reboot.target will reboot it right away. But systemctl isolate multi-user.target, if you're in the graphical system, will switch you to command line without rebooting. So you can test things out. It's kind of great. And that is our first set of slides. First of 2. Sorry. No. That was our second set of slides. Isn't that awesome? One more. One more. And then we're going to go. Well, we're not going to go. Then we're going to go to another video. So, maybe you'll go. I don't know. So on to part 2, which I guess I could have done this as a second video, but I'm here. It's only 8 slides. It seems silly to make a second video. Sudo. We've used sudo, right? Switch user do or super user do. It allows you to, it's like run as administrator, right? It allows you to perform tasks with elevated privileges without having to switch to root. It's a handy thing. Now we've been using it, but there's more to using it than that we want to, more than just using it that we want to explore, which is what we're going to do. Now we've been using this semester so far, and I think I've told you guys a little bit as to why, right? But here's kind of reinforcing that why. In an industry, I hate using real world, right? In industry, when you go out and work in industry, nobody's just gonna likely give you the root account or the ability to switch to root with the root password, right? For lots of reasons. If you write that account on a piece of paper and stick it to your monitor and somebody else steals it and they hack the system, they got full access to everything, right? There's a lot of reasons why we don't do that. So you use sudo, and we've already been using it, right? You just stick sudo in front of any command you want to run your elevated privileges, and it does it for you if you're allowed to. But usually, you got a bunch of admins in the organization, not just one. And if they're all logged into root, you have no idea what they did, because everything shows up in root's file, right? Now, stuff that you issue through sudo goes to your history. But there's also a special sudo log file. So if somebody made a change on the system and it broke something, it might not have been nefarious, right? Somebody just didn't realize that this would break something over here, because that happens all the time. You can find out who broke it and then go ask them and say, hey, what's going on? What up? What were you trying to do? Because it broke this thing. And figure out the problem together, right? And it also means you don't have to share the root password. So that makes it a lot more secure. So it's a really good thing for security. So I mentioned everything's logged, right? It's logged to var log secure. All the commands that are run through sudo. So this is handy for tracking who did what command. It also tracks, and you've seen this if you tried to run sudo on any system and it said it will be logged if it was a failed attempt. That gets logged there too. So it's a handy thing to audit if somebody's trying to break into your system, right? You see a bunch of things there. It's also possible somebody was working on their home system and now they're on the work system and they just naturally type sudo, try to do this thing without, because they just switched systems without realizing they hadn't logged out first. I do that all the time on Matrix. All the time. So we know what sudo is. We know why we should use it. How do you control access to it? There's a couple ways. The first up, there's a file called in etc. Again, you know it's important, right? It's in that etc directory. etc sudoers. And everybody in that file, it's specified that they can or can't use the command. And the cool thing about sudo is you can give people access, users access to just certain commands that they can run with elevated privileges. So if you've got an admin who's only responsible for backing up the system, you can give them sudo access to a subset of commands, that like 4 or 5 commands, whatever they need for running the backups, and they don't need everything else. And that's way more secure than giving them the root password, isn't it? You can't do that when you just give someone the root password. It's a great thing. Now, you should never edit that file directly. Use the command vi-sudo instead. Or there's another way to do it. And this is the way we're going to do it. The other way to do it is you create files for the users that you want to have sudo access, and they go into etc sudoers.d. It's a directory. And of course, you're going to need root access to edit that directory, right? So you just you create the file for the user or group, put the file permissions in there, and when you want to remove them later, instead of having to go through etc sudoers to find that user and remove their permissions, or find the people that are, right, the group, remove their permissions, you just get rid of that file. It's pretty great. So for the file in there, or files in there, which you're going to create some, this is the syntax. The first element or first entry, who. So who is the user. And if it's a group, you just put a percent in front of the name of the group, and you're good to go. Where, so this could specify this system or machine where this entry applies, because we're dealing with an operating system that can function in a network, right? So this could be for every machine on the network, because everything's synchronized. As whom, so that means or lists who the accounts can run the commands as. You could run it just as root. You could run it as other users. It's pretty handy. And then the what is a comma-separated list of commands that the user can run. Isn't that great? You can use sudo, by the way, to run commands as other users, not just as root. It's pretty handy. And if you look in those files, right, you look in etc sudoers, you're not going to find your user account. And if you look in that directory for a minute, etc sudoers.d, you're not going to find your account either. And that's because when you did the install, you checked the checkbox beside your user that said make this user administrator. And if you didn't, I fixed this for you with the knowledge that you're getting right now. When you did that, it added you to the wheel group. So this is a special group in Linux that has access to everything in sudo, so they can do everything that root can. So the easiest way to give a user access to sudo is just add them to the wheel group as an auxiliary group, right? As not their primary group. And then they can do everything. It's pretty great. So we learned a ton of stuff in a half-hour video. We learned, we learned a ton of stuff. So that's going to conclude video 1 of 2 or 3. We'll see how long the second one is when I get there. I will see you in the next video, which you might be watching right away. You might be watching in a couple hours. I don't know. Take care. Be safe. See you in the next video. And see you in class this week. Bye for now.